Hello, my name is Mark Dickey-Collas and I'm the chair of the ICES Advisory Committee. I'd like to, over the next 30 minutes, share with you a presentation that I gave at the Fisheries Society for the British Isles Annual Symposium in 2021, my keynote on the ecosystem-based management pilgrimage. And first, I'd like to thank Eleanor Pletts, who worked with me to create the narrative and also provide many of the illustrations you're going to see. And secondly, I'd like to introduce to you Mårk and Mindi, these two natural scientists who are going to join us as we journey along through the ecosystem-based management pilgrimage. Now, a pilgrimage is a walk with purpose, and it has a number of steps or stages. And I'm going to go through 10 stages with you of the ecosystem-based management pilgrimage. And as I said earlier, it's from the perspective of a natural scientist developing the evidence into the EBM process. Now, there are many similar approaches to EBM about making sure that we deliver management objectives for sustainable futures, but EBM is slightly different in that it is embedded in treaties and legislation. And Rob Stevenson's paper in 2021 covers this very well. So we have the call. Here we have Mårk looking out the window thinking, I feel I have to go on a journey. So ecosystem-based management is about delivering management and objectives. And an example of these are the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but each region, community, or international setting has a collection of goals and objectives. Here we have an example of 4 objectives: to restore seabed habitats, to achieve sustainable fisheries, build sustainable communities, and maintain good governance. But as you would expect, there needs to be some prioritization, and there will inevitably be trade-offs between these objectives. And this, in essence, is the basis for ecosystem-based management, working with the objectives and discovering what are the priorities and the trade-offs and how we can make good decisions using a strong evidence-based or the appropriate evidence-based. And in the situation with ICES, our call is clear. In the ICES strategy, the mission says to advance and share scientific understanding of marine ecosystems and the services they provide, and to use this knowledge to generate state-of-the-art advice for meeting conservation, management, and sustainability goals. And this translates in the ICES advisory plan to describe advice that supports ecosystem-based decision-making for the management of human activities and contributes towards effective application of an ecosystem approach which seeks to maintain the health of marine ecosystems alongside appropriate human use. So if you share this kind of call, ICES is an appropriate arena and organization for you to join and to work in as we move on the ecosystem-based management pilgrimage. So that's the call. Luckily, with ecosystem-based management, we have guidance. And here you can see Mårk and Mindi looking at their map and compass saying, aha, we have what we need. There are many definitions of ecosystem-based management, but they all draw on the principles in the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, and the more fisheries-oriented ones come from the UN FAO guidelines for fisheries. The principles must be seen as aspirational, fuzzy, and they map the direction, conditions, and the boundaries for ecosystem-based management. So the tree on the left here shows the development of the concepts of the EBM principles, coming from the Brundtland Report and the Rio Declaration and Law of the Sea, going through to the CBD Malawi principles, and I've already mentioned the FAO guidance, to a whole host of other treaties and legislation. Crucially, with the principles, they address the objectives, which must be societally determined, involve prioritization, and you will expect change, and trade-offs are inevitable. They have a context that the gains of management will be in economic and social context as well as ecological, and certainly within the ecosystem limits. Scale is important. The appropriate scale must be used both for temporal and spatial measures. It is best to be decentralized and acknowledge that regional concerns and equity occur. It's also about well-being, and it's not just human well-being, it's ecosystem well-being, as the two are synonymous, and it's for present and future generations. Now, in the ICES context, we have an EBM statement. We don't have an ICES definition of EBM, but we have this statement, and it is around key phrases: management of human activities, consideration of collective pressures, achievement of good environmental status, sustainable use, optimization of benefits among diverse social goals, regionalization, trade-offs, and stewardship for future generations. If you Google ICES EBM statement, you can find the full document there. So the third stage is reflecting on your role. And here we see the two pilgrims sitting and thinking and contemplating their roles. So when you're on the EBM pilgrimage, you need to recognize what drives you, why you are providing the evidence into the system. What is your legitimate role? Be aware of your own values and hopes. And you must think about what you as a knowledge provider hope to achieve. Are you a pure scientist? Are you an arbiter? Are you an advocate, an honest broker, or a science insider? There are many different hats you could wear, and I think it's important that you consider beforehand what kind of role you want to play. And if we look at this paper by Van der Helm and Bierman, which is based around the framework offered by Cash et al., you'll see three modes of authority for evidence providers. We have assessment-oriented, advice-oriented, and solution-oriented. And in the bottom row, you see the legitimacy issues, thinking of your roles. You can have your legitimacy through representation. You can have it through formal recognition, or through participation or participatory processes. And that really helps you to focus in on how you are going to contribute to the EBM pilgrimage. Upon this reflection, if you start engaging in the ICES system, you must be aware that ICES makes quite an issue of being an impartial knowledge provider. And we expect that the experts in our system that synthesize the knowledge and work to create advice declare any actual potential or perceived conflicts of interest. So you must reflect on whether ICES is an appropriate organization for you to join if you wish to be an advocate of certain issues, because you will be asked as an expert to conduct yourself in a manner that's consistent with scientific independence, integrity, and impartiality. And it's that reputation which has made organizations and governments come to ICES for advice. We don't advocate that our advice be acted upon, and we give it in an independent manner. Stage 4, the equipment. A suite of tools is available to you, and here you can see Mindi is getting her walking boots and putting away the map and the compass, and Mårk is already heading off down the road. In EBM, remember that it's not solely a study of the ecosystem, but an implied exercise using knowledge on the social ecological system, ecosystem-based management. It's about providing the evidence to help the managers. Look ahead and think about what you need to take, what the likely risks are, and how to stay agile. Now, these tools for EBM come in many shapes and sizes and are needed for a range of purpose. This paper by Howard Townsend and others, is in review. And it identifies the tools that are required in EBM for trade-off analysis and reconciliation. You need to identify those trade-offs between the objectives, evaluate the consequences of the actions if you choose certain objectives over others, present and explore the findings with stakeholders, with managers, monitor use and assess how it is applied in the field, how it is implemented, and evaluate the operational performance of both the tools but also of the management itself. And the tools, I think you'll recognize many. We have a list here with conceptual modeling, Bayesian belief networks, spatial static tools, dynamic spatial tools, and mice and others. And then, of course, you have the slightly broader frameworks such as risk assessment, management strategy, evaluation, and structured multi-criteria decision-making. So there's a host of tools available to you. And in ICES, we work hard to ensure that the science program keeps improving the knowledge base, both for pure science and also to advise and contribute to the ecosystem-based management process. And the areas, the priority scientific areas are ecosystem science, impacts of human activities, observation and exploration, emerging techniques and technologies, seafood production, which includes fisheries and aquaculture, conservation and management science, and sea and society. Some of these you will recognize as traditional ICES areas of research, and others you may think of as fairly new, such as sea and society and emerging technologies. Now we turn to the illumination. EBM is context specific. You will discover new ways of working and new things to do. You need to show empathy of how the system will create and how it will use new knowledge. You need to accept the plurality of ideas and knowledge. You're in a specific location with some specific challenges about management of the activities that are impacting the ecosystem and the expectations in terms of ecosystem status. And then you need to look around and discover, see what evidence is available. You need to see who is about, who's prepared to work with you. So this is the illumination, looking around at the immediate environment and the resources that are available and required to carry out and carry on your EBM pilgrimage. So Jared Singh, in a recent paper, has said something that isn't new, but I like the wording here. This has been said by many, many applied marine scientists over the decades. Science does not inherently lead to sustainable or unsustainable or equitable or unequitable outcomes. The outcomes will depend on how, where, when, and by whom the science is designed, funded, conducted, and used. Science itself does not provide good management. An effective use of that science or knowledge can help provide good management or help influence the management. But it's important to understand how that science is put together, funded, and how it is brought into the arena of the management. So the expectations for the evidence for decision making are many, and how it's made, why it's made, how it's funded are all key, as was said before. And there's lots and lots of work published on best approaches for providing evidence into EBM, and here we have the Nordstrom paper, which is providing evidence into sustainability research. But I think the four issues here are just as relevant for EBM. You have to be context-based. I've already touched on that with the illuminations. Pluralistic, explicitly recognize the multiple ways of knowing and doing. You have to be goal-oriented, articulate clearly defined, shared and meaningful goals that are related to the challenge in hand. To some extent, we've discussed some of the objectives already. And interactive. Allow for ongoing learning among actors, active engagement and frequent interactions. Now, I've been giving you examples from ICES for many of these steps along the pilgrimage, and here is a really very wonderful example from the WK Irish process, which was at least 6 workshops looking at ecosystem-based fisheries management in the Irish Sea. And there are a number of papers published on this work. This one recently by Jacob Bentley looks at ecosystem productivity into fisheries advice. And it's extremely applied how to take ecosystem variability into the advice framework of ICES. And Jacob sums up by saying research objectives and outputs need to be in alignment with the policy questions and frameworks. And dedicated collaboration between researchers, policy advisors and stakeholders is needed early and often. Are you seeing the theme on this pilgrimage yet? So, number 6, the companions. And Mårk and Mindi are on the pilgrimage and they're being joined by others. And you hope to be joined by others on an EBM pilgrimage. Be mindful of your roles and responsibilities of the fellow pilgrims. Some will join easily and readily, others more reluctant or less able. You will engage with researchers from other disciplines too. All have different hopes for the process and bring different power dynamics. Now, there isn't a panacea for stakeholder engagement. There isn't a rule book on how it must be done. As we've said before, every challenge is context specific. You need to explore and think about the approach that is best for your situation. I think it's crucial that you take an agnostic stance in terms of stakeholder engagement. What is best in my situation? So here we have 2 models which are broadly showing the same kind of lineage, going from consultation to co-production. One is for fisheries management, very clearly, where we go from Australia, from centralized, consultative, collaborative, delegated models with changes in the proportion of fishers to government or officials in the process. And that's specifically aimed at management. And then on the right-hand side, also from Australia, is the work of Chris Sitanovich and friends, where we have consultation, engagement, co-production, where we move from stakeholders as inputs to stakeholders as partners. And in the ICES context, we have some recent work by myself and Martha Ballesteros, where we've looked at how stakeholders are engaging in ICES, whether they contribute to the science or the scientific advice, and how they contribute to the content or actually to the process. Because when you engage with stakeholders, it's not just where you're going, but how you get there. And Martha and I showed that, or highlighted that there are experts, observers, participants, and partners working in different parts of the ICES network and the ICES advisory system. Now, the same individuals can be playing different roles in different parts of the system, so that's quite important to take into account. And I love showing this example, and I would encourage you to read the paper if you're specifically working on ecosystem-based fisheries management. This is the work of Muffley et al. From the USA, the Mid-Atlantic region, where stakeholder engagement was used to build credibility, relevance, and legitimacy for the management of some fish stocks. I've said here it's a great example, scientists working iteratively in partnership, exploring risk and prioritization of management actions. Now, poor old Mindi and Mårk, they've got lost. And getting lost is often inevitable, almost always inevitable in EBM. Barriers will occur, but I could be very sort of optimistic and say that these are learning experiences. Expecting implementation to be ordered and linear will lead to disappointment and frustration. Different reasons might prevent reform. Innovate and be responsive to the complexity of the social ecological system. And I would recommend Beth Fulton's recent paper on ecosystem-based fisheries management in Fish and Fisheries, where she explores the reasons why it might be hard to reform systems or change them or adapt them. There are myths about ecosystem-based management, and there are two papers by Steve Murawski and Patrick and Link, one looking at EBM, the other at EBFM. And I've taken some of their examples and put them up here of myths that people say prevent EBM being carried out. EBM is poorly defined, there are no guidelines, it's pie in the sky panacea, success can't be measured. There are no mandates or effective governance structures. It's challenged in the international or developing country context. It needs copious amounts of data, complex models, must be well resourced, needs to understand all the ecosystem processes, and there are no good operational examples. And I would ask you, if you're interested in myths, to have a look at the Murawski and Patrick and Link papers, because they really help explain why these myths are actually not that valid at all. But I really must be honest with you, there are still plenty of challenges that have been highlighted. And Jennings and Rice, Ramirez Monsalva and Rudd, etc., list a number of those challenges. They include the differential industrial power of some of the sectors, national interests, longer term objectives being overruled for shorter term ones, problems with local capacity. Don't forget you're context specific, so you need local capacity and developing expertise in those regions where you're looking at EBM challenges. Interpreting objectives can be difficult. There are always challenges in co-producing knowledge. There is often a low will to work with you. There are often administrative practices that get in the way. And there is quite often an imbalance in terms of how you work with stakeholders. The transitional costs as you move to EBM can be quite high. And maritime boundaries can prevent easy development of ideas and also the collection of your knowledge, your surveying and your analysis. There isn't that much guidance on trade-offs. And I found generally natural scientists are not very good at dealing with power dynamics. And the one I haven't mentioned here is crisis swamp plans. We've just coming out, hopefully, of a pandemic, and it's very evident that crisis swamp plans. So in the ICES context, we build a lot of our credibility on trust. And Chris Sivanovich et al. In 2021 have used ICES as a study of losing and rebuilding trust. And they mention that there are 14 ways to help build trust, and then suggest 5 mechanisms afterwards for rebuilding that trust. And some of them include things like listen to stakeholders and accept feedback, allow time for trust to form, ensure data quality control, have regular contact, and be mindful of local politics and political sensitivities. And crucially, these 14 elements have all been developed by talking to experts from the ICES community and also members of the ICES Secretariat. Now, the revelation. This is when things begin to get exciting. Every EBM project will have differing objectives, challenges, and companions. You will encounter novel challenges and solutions and opportunities. It might change you as a researcher even. You might discover that the reason the EBM pilgrimage is so hard is due to governance, not paucity of knowledge in terms of monitoring of the ecosystem. It might be that the governance system is just not appropriate or needs adapting. So here we have Mårk and Mindi, And their revelation is, oh my goodness, we've been using a map and a compass. And in fact, we had phones with us, which are directly linked to the GPS. And we can now move on using our new instruments, tools, and gaining more knowledge. So the revelation that we personally have experienced in the North Atlantic through the Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance, and this actually is in a paper that I submitted to the journal associated with the Fisheries Society Annual Symposium, is that there are 5 key messages in the North Atlantic about EBM. And this is the work of Canadian, United States, and European scientists. Yes, we can. Adequate mandates and effective tools exist for ecosystem-based management. Ecosystem-based management enables new benefits and opportunities. Make the business case. Integration of the human dimension is essential for ecosystem-based management. Diversify the conversation. Some stakeholders don't see their stake in EBM. Engage them and target ocean literacy to professionals and dialogue. A sustainable future requires a sustained investment in ecosystem-based management. Commitment is key. So those were the revelations after a 4-year project in the North Atlantic. And we found that it left us with a very positive feeling that EBM was possible across the North Atlantic. However, another revelation, I touched on the issue of learning something new, is perhaps lots and lots of science doesn't necessarily always help management. And here on the left is a table put together by Nygaard et al. 2020 of all the decision support tools that have been developed for the Baltic Sea over the last 20 years. And on the right-hand side is the HELCOM State of the Baltic Pressures and Diversity assessment, where you see the red is not so good, and we have problems with eutrophication, hazardous substances, non-indigenous species, and commercial fishing in terms of all those pressures. So the revelation here is having decision support tables or tools may not necessarily lead directly to better management. I'm happy to talk to people separately about this because I have some quite strong views why decision support tools tend not to work so well. And here we come to the transformation. Mindi and Mårk and all their friends have got together. They were what you thought of as fluffy, cute people, but in fact they're really cogs in a machine. And the cog and the machine are now working wonderfully. There are benefits of the pilgrimage, scientific and management rationales, and the benefits of EBM have been well chronicled. EBM is a wise investment with both societal and private benefits. The transformation will usually occur. And in terms of the business case for EBM, this is becoming clearer and clearer. There are private and societal benefits across the ecosystem services accounting for diverse social values. And it's important to remember that those social values will be diverse. There isn't a monopoly on truth or science or knowledge, and there isn't a monopoly on values. Reduced transaction costs of governance will occur compared to business as usual with more efficiency. There will be increased predictability in management and governance and prioritization of the objectives, the explicit prioritization of the objectives of maritime uses and alignment with social objectives will likely occur. And in terms of the ICES context, I'd like to share with you one transformation that has occurred over the last few years as ICES moves from its important role in giving the fish stock advice, the catch options as we call it, to providing tools to show trade-offs across spatial elements of the European continental shelf. On the right is
a capture from an interactive spatial tool that we now have available that shows 90% of a spatial map of where 90% of the fishing occurs in this part of the Northeast Atlantic shelf. And these interactive maps of trade-offs between trawl impact and seabed can now be run looking at the value of landed catch. Now, this is a transformation in terms of how ICES is providing tools through dialogue with managers and stakeholders that help assist in decision-making for ecosystem-based management.
And the final stage that I'm going to talk about is the following journey. And here we have a friend, actually, of Mårk and Mindi. I haven't given her a name yet, we'll see. And here she's realizing that actually they're on their journey and she's about to head off on hers. EBM is based on fuzzy principles. There is always feedback from experiences, and consultations are vital. EBM will have many cycles and iterations and often include an adaptive framework. In fact, probably will always require an adaptive framework. I'm going to give you some examples. These three are quite well known, particularly for those of us who work in ecosystem-based management. They're three examples of cycles of EBM. The one on the left is the EU Marine Strategy Framework Directive, the MSFD, which has a 6-year cycle of assessment, monitoring, programme of measures, implementation and review, all based around good environmental status. The one in the middle is the quite long-running Baltic Sea Action Plan put together by HELCOM, and that feeds and helps guide HOLAS, which is the holistic assessment of the Baltic Sea, and they're now on the third one, and they're also planning the next version of the Baltic Sea Action Plan. And then on the right-hand side, you have the NOAA Fisheries Service IEA approach, which defines goals and targets, develops indicators, assesses the ecosystem, analyzes uncertainty and risk, and then evaluates the strategies. And then all of that goes into another loop of implementation, evaluation, and monitoring. Again, a circular cycle. And in ICES, we have a form of renewal that is ongoing, or evolution. Here we have the ICES Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Expert Groups, which are regularly developing and re-energizing. We started with the Greater North Sea and the Baltic Sea, and then they were joined with the Northwest Atlantic Seas Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Groups, and the Norwegian and the Barents Sea. And then the Azores, Greenland Sea, and the Northern Bering Sea and Chukchi Sea joined in, and it continued. And while that was going on, the Greater North Sea and the Baltic Sea again began to readdress how they developed the methods for integrated ecosystem assessment in ICES. So it is about the following journey. So the pilgrimage is how you walk, not just why you walk. The international community has converged towards an understanding of broad-scale integrated approaches to marine resource management. The necessary components and future needs to support better implementation include requirements for clearly identifying objectives, stakeholder ownership, and well-defined governance frameworks. And scientific tools to deal with evaluations, conflicts, and trade-offs are still necessary as well. Over the years, I've had a number of conversations with wonderful people like Beth Fulton, Rosa Barcella, Martha Ballesteros, Paul Demble, and many, many others. And I've put together some comments that have left me fairly inspired, but also challenged in terms of engaging as a researcher in the EBM pilgrimage. It will take much longer than expected. It's always frustrating and may not succeed, resulting in great pain. The dialogue discourse will challenge our academic training, and we must learn how to work deliberately with what we perceive as imperfection. We need to establish equitable partnerships. Listening to others underpins our capacity to connect, build trust, adapt, and evolve. And the drive for simple communication may result in misleading answers, but as everybody is always busy, you need to reduce the workload on partners. The cycle will keep improving, and the system keeps changing. Changing in management objectives and priorities will occur. The knowledge base will keep improving, but the expectations of society will change. There are very clearly well-documented EBM successes and failures, but don't lose heart. Think about the call, the guidance, the reflection, equipment, illumination, companions, getting lost, revelation, transformation, and the following journey. So with that, I would like to thank you all for giving me your time. I hope you found the presentation useful. I would also, again, like to thank Eleanor Pletts for helping put the narrative together and also provide the artwork. And I'd like to thank everybody that I've worked with on the EBM pilgrimage over the years as well. Thank you very much. So here we have a reading list of most of the papers that I've cited. But if you have any further questions or comments about this work, you can leave it in the comments sections below. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best. Bye-bye.